Welcome to the March edition of the Build Test Solutions webinar series. In this episode, we will be exploring how procurement should be considered as part of a bigger process for ensuring continuous improvement and measurement of building performance. Today's webinar will be presented by Luke Smith, who is Managing Director here at BTS.
Good afternoon, all. I think you're mad turning up on to listen to me talk about procurement on such a day. But no, thank you for showing up. So the talk today, webinar session, embedding building performance measurement through procurement. So here at BTS, we obviously talk a lot about the available measurement technologies, how they work, what's involved. But yeah, the intention or thought process behind this session is to just try and take a bit of a step back, appreciate how projects are typically procured and delivered, and then have a think about how measurement can fit in with this rather than it being viewed as a nice to have optional extra. Bit of a disclaimer up front, obviously procurement in itself is a really large, complex subject in its own right. Can't possibly do it justice in kind of 30 minutes, but the aim of this talk, like I say, is just to provide a bit of an overview and begin to provoke a bit of a different way of thinking. In the session today, then we'll cover a little bit of an overview of what procurement is, why it matters, why it's so important when we're thinking about measurement, and then I've kind of categorized procurement into two kind of categories, really. I think we've got almost like the status quo, procuring to regulations. So we'll have a bit of a think about that and what that looks like, what business as usual looks like today. And then obviously this concept, this notion of procuring for outcomes, which is I think where we ultimately want to be. And throughout that, we'll litter in a few sort of case studies and think about the kind of practicalities, and then we'll wrap up with a few calls to action. Before we delve in then, I just want to run a quick poll just to understand the split in the room. Tanya, if you wouldn't mind running that. It's completely anonymous and there's no strict right or wrong here. I just want to get an idea for how many are kind of what I'd classify as professional advisors providing advice and consultancy service. How many are contractors, installers, manufacturers, and then how many are kind of managing buildings on the buying side. I can't actually see the results of this. Can you see those coming in, Tanya?
Yes, I can do. I'll talk us through the results in a moment or two. They are coming in.
Oh yeah, no, I can see them now as well.
See them? Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping for a nice split, really. Understandably, at the moment, quite a strong bias towards those selling professional services. So by that, I mean provision of retrofit assessment services, consultancy, air tightness testing, ventilation measurement testing. Clearly, that's for Build Test Solutions, that's our core customer base. But yeah, we've also got, by the looks of things, sellers in the way of capital works, so contractors, installers, providers of equipment and products. Got a few housing associations, local authorities in the room, and also some private sector kind of building owners, managers, landlords. So I think right from the off, like that's quite it's important to appreciate that's what makes up our supply chain. Clearly a dynamic between those selling services and capital works and those that are out to procure. Okay, so let me just get back to the right screen. Okay, so thanks for doing that poll, and it'll stay live, so anyone else who hasn't posted a response, please do. It just helps for a bit of context. But yeah, just a quick overview of Build Test Solutions. So basically our mission as a business is to eliminate guesswork in building performance and accelerate that transition to better quality, healthier buildings. So we're essentially exist to pioneer, bring about practical measurement technologies to deliver accurate, actionable insights. So essentially we're encouraging people, for example, not to wait until mold appears and there's a complaint. We want to measure air tightness and ventilation and ensure that the right solution's in place from the very start. So we're a technology orientated business trying to facilitate that shift from declared performance to measured real world performance, get away from this kind of knee-jerk reaction to problems, and try and get have the industry on the front foot in terms of our understanding of buildings and what the right solution is for them. And yeah, can't stress enough, Build-Test Solutions, we're a manufacturer and supplier of building performance measurement technology. We're about empowering others to measure. So like I just touched on, we're supporting professional advisors, housing associations, contractors to be able to bring measurement capabilities in-house or to their own toolbox to be able to offer to their customers. So this isn't a really crude presentation saying procure BTS. This is saying measurement in the round wants to be part of the conversation in terms of procurement of your own services as a professional advisor or a contractor installer. Okay, so what is procurement then? So it's more than just purchasing. Procurement's a strategic, long-term process that involves planning, sourcing, negotiating, managing contracts for goods and services. If we just look at this diagram on the right-hand side of the slide first, start really simple. If we imagine installing or seeking to install a new kitchen at home, clearly you want to define your needs. What requirements do you have? Are there anything specific around where you want to place the washing machine and the kitchen sink? Do you have any particular preferences around worktops and certain appliances? You might do a bit of market testing, so you might go out to some showrooms or get some brochures in, look at some sort of on Instagram and images of what other people have done, get some inspiration, some ideas. So that's all about sort of defining your needs. And then of course you go out to tender. So almost at any level of expenditure, people are getting multiple quotes. You cannot make an informed decision without speaking to a few different suppliers, getting a feel for different levels, different price points, and what services are being offered exactly. And yeah, I don't care if it's a massive public sector multi-million-pound procurement contract or dare I say it, kind of going as far as buying cornflakes in Lidl. You're looking at what are your options, what's the price, what's the difference, and what am I getting for my money? And so you're evaluating those tenders, those quotes, and as I'll come on to in a moment, as much as everyone would argue it's always down to price, it's nothing else, but there is a lot of consideration that goes into that broader kind of picture of the value for money around sort of environmental, social benefits, long-term kind of impacts associated with the expenditure. Then of course you're into the blue circle there, managing the contract. You've appointed your preferred supplier. It's all about oversight, KPIs, managing delivery, working together to deliver the project. Back to your kitchen analogy, you're checking in on the installer, making sure everything's going to plan. There might be some variations as things go. You uncover things you didn't anticipate. You're priming the contractor with lots of tea and cake to make sure they stay on side. And then of course you have the project delivered, and there's an element of learning, refining the process, feeding it into perhaps the next job that you might do. You might use that same contractor again to help you renovate your bathroom or whatever it may be. So yeah, hopefully that's fairly clear. Some will argue procurement is made up of many more, much more complicated stages than that, but that is the broad kind of procurement life cycle. And then you've got public procurement, which I think is what gets a lot of the limelight. So essentially any public body, social housing provider, local authority, government department, essentially if they're spending over a certain threshold, so in this case capital works over 5.3 million, or procuring services over a value of 214,000, then the regulation, the Procurement Act 2023 applies. And this triggers things like having to list the opportunity on the what's called the Find a Tender portal, FTS, and award notices have to be published. So once the appointed contractor or service provider has been made, or that appointment's been made, then it has to be made public as to who that person is. And also the Social Value Act applies. This is fairly new regulation, and essentially this defines that, again, public procurement is going beyond just what used to be termed MEAT, most economically advantageous tender, and the term now is MAT, most advantageous tender. So this is, yeah, taking the economic side of it to one side a little bit and saying, like I just touched on, you have to deliver environmental and social benefits as part of a contract as well. And clearly when we're thinking about retrofit, low energy new builds, you can really drive out those kind of environmental and social outcomes and benefits. And then I would categorize basically everything else as below threshold. So clearly what we're talking about there, public procurement, really high threshold, big projects. But despite that, again, lots of these housing associations, local authorities, they're still having to demonstrate value for money, still having to obtain multiple quotes. And similarly, even if you're a private organization, a house builder, a developer, again, you're foolish if you're not getting quotes and assessing the market and determining kind of what whether you're getting value for money or not. So yeah, probably even lower than this, to be honest, as a threshold, but anything kind of 50 grand or more as a contract value is almost always an advertised opportunity. The buyer absolutely wants to know what's out there, what's who can provide what service for me at what price, and what do I get for my money. And really importantly as well, there's a whole host of this like localism agenda, and again, regardless of the spend threshold, organizations do want to try and keep work local to the job in hand. They do have objectives around appointing a certain number of SMEs and supporting SMEs, and even the social housing fund, the Warm Home Social Housing Fund, currently under wave 3 at the moment. There are objectives in that in those sort of competition briefings, or the terms of those grants, that they have to be generating local green jobs. So yeah, again, as much as it may well be, you may well think that there's just an outright drive to lowest price, there are all these other factors that need to be considered. And then a quick mention, some of you will be familiar, so to sometimes help ease the whole procurement process and speed up delivery of this cycle, there are framework providers, so companies like Fusion 21, Procure Plus, LHC. There's a whole host of organizations that you can just Google framework provider, social housing framework provider, local authority framework provider, and these essentially pre-procure a bunch of suppliers. Getting onto those frameworks doesn't necessarily win you work directly, but you're then available then for an organization to come along and do what would be termed a mini competition or a direct call off from those frameworks. So again, depending on your size and appetite, certain organisations might seek to be on those frameworks just so that they're available to be called upon. Otherwise, yeah, you're perhaps doing well to seek out on find a tender and the published award notices, who's won what in your area, what's active, what's going on, and speak to those housing associations, local authorities, bigger organisations locally to understand what their needs are and how you might be able to help. Okay, so then in terms of why does procurement matter, let's go on to the number bit around measurement then. So obviously the number one reason why procurement matters is because it's where the money is. The Warm Homes Plan, we've heard it to death already, is touted as a £15 billion opportunity. I think that's actually only half the story, because things like the Social Housing Warm Home Fund, some of the 5 billion allocated to green finance and loans is actually match funded. So you've actually got 10 billion against each of those respectively. So divide that over the next 4 or 5 years, the time frame in which the Warm Home Plan is touted to be delivered, and you've got an opportunity there of 7 to 8 billion in expenditure across a whole host of energy efficiency measures, heat pumps, and so on. The new build residential sector is worth 40 billion per annum, delivering about 250,000 homes a year. Obviously, Labour's ambition is to be even higher than that, at 350,000 units a year. And then I think what a really interesting one when we think about procurement is then the RMI sector, the repair, maintenance, improvement sector. It's massive, 50 billion per annum, and that's your kitchens, bathrooms, extensions, this kind of run-of-the-mill kind of home improvements. But I think what's interesting there is that the whole retrofit agenda, the whole energy efficiency, whether it's heat pumps, solar, insulation, has really struggled to break into that. And I think it's partly down to the fact that despite the size of the sector, it's very small, transactional kind of individual one-off purchases and bits of activity that are going on, unlike social housing or large kind of private sector landlords that are managing a portfolio and procuring on a broader basis. So yeah, I think again that's quite an interesting one from a procurement perspective, and that's why that particular sector is quite hard to break into due to its transactional nature. So from individual projects to large-scale schemes, procurement teams really do hold the power. They're the ones holding the purse strings to demand evidence of performance. So that's your first kind of look in for, well, actually, if we're spending this money, why aren't we insisting on seeing that what you spent your money on is delivering what was asked for? So yeah, is money being spent on the right things and delivering the anticipated benefits? When you've got price, on the other side of the coin, you've got quality. So yeah, I can get quite worked up about this actually. So you look across the Warm Homes Plan, the Future Home Standard consultation. Dame Judith Hackett did an independent review of the building regulations and fire safety off the back of the Grenfell disaster. Those documents mention the importance of quality and quality assurance countless times, 42 times in the Warm Homes Plan, 27 times in the consultation for the Future Home Standard, 57 times in the review of regulations. And you just have to, well, what are we doing differently? Of course, there can always be more enforcement, better skills, better products, but you can only ensure quality if there's a culture of measurement, checking, presenting evidence. And so, yeah, there's always going to be the split between price and quality, but just it's so important that we have this recognition of the true whole life cost. You might be saving a few pennies up front, doing a cheaper retrofit assessment than otherwise wholesale measurement-led assessment to understand the building, but then ultimately you're ending up putting the wrong products in the build, installing and spending far more money than you needed to maybe on the capital expenditure side, or not getting the performance outcomes that you expected. So yeah, Really important when we're thinking about quality to have that whole picture view. This mapped most advantageous tender, not most economically advantageous tender. So again, procurement and associated tender documents set out expectations at the very early. And then, so yeah, I think just trying to think of measurement is not just a technical task. It's actually central to quality assurance and making sure that we're getting what we want. And then hand in glove with quality, we have performance. So obviously we talk at length about this countless times. We all know that there's such a thing as a performance gap. Buildings rarely perform as expected. Plus minus 100% is very, very common. You think a building's really leaky, you go and measure it, it's actually very airtight. You think a building's been designed to be super airtight, you go and measure it and it's horrendously leaky. These things go both ways, and classic adage, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so, yeah, obviously, and then the cost of failure of that is if you're not getting the performance that you expect, the occupant ultimately has higher bills. You're potentially faced with really high mediation, rework costs. You're missing your objective. You're missing your net zero targets or whatever the ambition might be of the program. And so we're seeking to try, ideally, to transition from buying a promise or just a product with sort of declared performance on the tin to buying an outcome. So I'm looking for a retrofit to deliver a thermal efficiency of a given level or a heating system efficiency. Strictly speaking, we shouldn't really, well, I don't think the buyer should necessarily worry too much about exactly what the technology is that gets used. I think it's what's most important that it's shown to perform at the end of the day. So yeah, really focus through procurement on where's the evidence that it works. People talk about the performance gap, the need for outcomes-based contracting a lot, but yeah, I think ultimately what it means is that we're, yes, this shift to being much more outcomes orientated in our specifications and documentation. Okay, so then thinking about the status quo then, procuring to regulations. Similar to this concept of procuring a promise, so the majority of new build and retrofit projects is to a design standard. So we specify a low energy building on paper, we model the low energy building, we come up with a specification and from a series of product specifications, product information sheets to culminate in what we think should be the ideal combination of products and technologies to deliver a low energy building or a low energy retrofit. And typically procurement will say, and of course this needs to adhere to the building regulations and needs to be delivered against standards such as PAS 2035, PAS 2030, MCS and so on. But I think even at this really basic level, projects fall short and we're missing out on a lot of the basics. And yeah, I couldn't sum it up better than with this image really. So don't tell me, show me. Evidence is key. So I've got a few bits on the next slide, but part F, forget what all the guidance and notes say. Part F says you have to provide adequate ventilation for people in the building. How can someone procuring a retrofit know that adequate ventilation has been provided without any form of there being any form of measurement? You have product specifications, the fan says it delivers a certain flow rate, but yeah, how does that sit in the context of the building? How does it perform? Does it deliver what you thought it would? There is no way you can tell without a series of measurements and checks. Similarly, Part L, the regulation says it's about limiting heat losses and gains. There's a strict regulation around commissioning and testing and sign off of the services to the building, the ventilation and the heating provision in particular. But yeah, again, how do you know that that's been delivered? You've limited thermal gains. Yes, you might have done in theory because you've said, well, yeah, I've applied 100 mil of insulation with a thermal conductivity of X. But again, if you're paying good money for that insulation as a service that's been delivered to you, how can you be absolutely sure that it does what it's telling you it does without measurement? And similarly, PAS 2035, there's a whole section 13 dedicated to monitoring and evaluation. It says the project shall, the retrofit coordinator, shall evaluate every retrofit project to determine whether the intended outcomes have been realised. I really don't hear of that happening very much at all under PAS 2035, how many projects are properly being evaluated and learnt from. And then, yeah, it really hits home for me when you mentioned it earlier, that the Dame Judith Hackett building regulations review, in her foreword, she talks about the four main issues being ignorance, lack of understanding of the regulations, people who are procuring not necessarily understanding exactly what the regulations say or what's required, indifference, so a tendency to prioritize sort of lower cost and speed of delivery over quality and performance, a lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities. So if housing associations procuring a retrofit, they perhaps expect the accreditation schemes and Trustmark to be making sure that if it's to PAS 2035, then it really is to PAS 2035 properly. So people sort of passing the buck or assuming it not to be their responsibility necessarily. And then the other one that comes up is inadequate regulatory oversight and enforcement. Again, obviously we could all argue there should be more policing and checking, but yeah, obviously if you're a housing association, you want to make your money go as far as possible, but you should also, of course, want to get what you're paying for and be sure that you haven't just installed a load of measures across a really nice big number of properties that's actually going to come back and bite you in terms of problems stored up in the future. And so, yeah, in case you don't believe me, there's a couple of screen grabs there. Top left, what Part F is saying, this is the outright regulation. There shall be adequate means of ventilation provided for people in the building. If that went to court with a housing association, how can you prove that there was adequate ventilation if you don't have any measurements or evidence that is the case? And for me, that's air tightness and ventilation flow rate measurements. On the right hand side there, you've got Part L. This is Regulation 23 in particular, which concerns renovation, replacement of thermal elements. But again, there you've got the strict regulation is about limiting heat gains and losses. How are you proving that's actually been delivered and evidenced beyond just some desktop heat loss calculations? I think if you're in the driving seat in terms of procurement, you really want to make sure that, okay, that's what we've asked for. Is that what we've actually got? And then on the left-hand side there, the purpose of this is section 13 in PAS 2035, saying here, the retrofit coordinator shall evaluate every project to determine whether the intended outcomes have been realised, identify and learn from any project-specific or systematic problems to inform the next project. But yeah, this is a shall requirement, and I'm really not seeing it being done. Okay, bit of a case study. This is a housing association retrofit project in Devon. For me, this is an example of good practice against the status quo. So this is a top-class tier 1 contractor put a lot of time and energy into extensive detailed design, working with some really great consultants. I won't name names, but yeah, consulting with manufacturers, suppliers, trying to come up with the best solution for the houses in question. And yeah, they've been quite proactive, and they've sought to measure against a few of the delivered homes. So the target design value on U values was 0.3, in line with Part L of the building regulations, basically. This involved, it was actually cavity fill or cavity extraction, followed by refill, followed by a bit of EWI. And the delivered U values were 0.38. So a little bit above the design, but again, the contractor really kind of met that quite enthusiastically and talked to the suppliers, tried to understand what drove that slight discrepancy. I don't think it's not that kind of difference isn't anything to be too concerned about, but it's, yeah, again, it's helpful to learn from it and know, was it to do with the product, the spec, or was actually the starting performance of the existing baseline performance of the wall different to what the design team thought it was. Delivered pretty good levels of air tightness in line with the design target, so an air permeability across the homes of 4 to 5.6 at 50 pascals. And ventilation broadly is continuous DMEV, broadly delivered in line with design intent, although kitchen extract boost rates were below Part F threshold, so actually non-compliant in the kitchens. Again, nothing to be too concerned about. There were adjustments made, and those extract rates increased. You can adjust these fans, can look at ductwork runs and so on. And then interestingly, some resident satisfaction surveys were also done on these homes, and there were reports of odours lingering in the kitchen, and there were some medium mould risk scores from the relative humidity data. So again, you can track that all the way back through to the ventilation flow rates, resolve that, you've addressed the root cause of the problem, and yeah, you can sign off on that project and know that, okay, under-delivered in a couple of places, but we've learned from it, we carry that on to the next project, everyone's a winner. And then the holy grail, moving on from you're just procuring against what building regulations or PAS 2035 says, I think where we want to be ultimately is people brave enough to procure against outcomes. So being very smart in those, in the setting of those outcomes, so very specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound in what you're setting out. I'm mindful of time, but the image on the right there, I think it's really easy to get carried away wanting to track energy use intensity, sort of metered energy use, internal conditions over a really long period of time. But obviously, if you're contracting on that basis, you're having to wait 12 months to obtain a year's worth of energy consumption data, or you're having to account for variations in occupancy and changes in weather effects that are influencing those numbers. So certainly at Build Test Solutions, we're really strong advocates of, if you're going to measure and understand anything, focus first and foremost on the building fabric. That's the performance of the physical asset, the air tightness of that enclosure, the U values, the HTC of that enclosure. If the fabric works in line with intent, then the systems and services can be calibrated to suit, commissioned to suit, and then frankly, people should be able to live within their homes to certain to within certain thresholds in terms of defined comfort levels, defined set points, and so on. So yeah, I think so setting smart objectives around maybe some fabric performance parameters, or things that can be measured in a fairly short timescale, I think is really important. And then you do have a host of interesting kind of best practices in this area. So the Good Homes Alliance hosts some employer requirements, model employer requirements, and design brief clauses. I touched base with the team there. This resource has been downloaded over 1,000 times. It's in the top 10 of Good Homes Alliance's most popular resources. So do definitely have a look at those. So if you're a local authority or housing association, you've got some ready-made clauses and terms there that you could sort of embed into your procurement specifications and things. We had a consultation last year under eco, or year before last even, under the energy company obligation, this concept of pay for performance. I don't think that's gone away. You see it in the non-domestic sector under the guises of energy performance contracting. You see it a lot in district heating schemes. This idea that you're contracted to deliver a given level of performance, and the payment terms are all tied to that. You see local planning teams able to go a bit beyond basic sort of regulatory requirements. So under planning policy require that there's post-completion testing. Again, social housing providers could go further on retrofits and requiring that outcomes are measured and demonstrated. And whilst they're not strictly enforced anywhere, you've got standards like BS 40101 around building performance evaluation, and BS 40104 around building assessment. And I touched on this earlier. Even though you might not necessarily be hitting certain thresholds, I think there's great scope for projects to really lean into the Social Value Act around what it talks about in terms of defining how you identify and procure against social and environmental outcomes. And I think, a great example of outcomes would be Energy Sprong, the Energy Sprong performance guarantee and comfort plan. So if you're a solution provider to Energy Sprong, you're contracting on the basis of a performance outcome specification. That's the grey box on the side there. So some very specific, measurable, achievable, time-bound criteria there around what comfort levels need to be delivered, what your annual energy consumption thresholds must be, and some great things in there around noise and other aspects of comfort and humidity and so on. So then the contract is geared such that the solution provider is responsible for designing and installing and evidencing the performance against that specification, and underperformance charges are within the contract to claw back money if that performance isn't delivered over time. So that's putting the risk back on the delivery agent, the solution provider, the contractor, but also a lot more autonomy in terms of how they ultimately get to that solution. So there's a whole host of different products and technologies that could achieve what's in the grey box there. Okay, so and then in terms of the business case, I could have put a whole host of slides to this, but I think you can read this list as a set of opportunities, regardless of your position in the supply chain, whether you're a professional advisor, someone out there procuring, or someone out there providing capital works delivery. I think I've touched on this a few times. Property assessment or the design stage, it is well worth spending money upfront to save money over the long term. So poor data equates to poor decision making. As it being really clear and recognizing that are we spending, are we putting the right solutions in the right homes and building to a spec that we know works. So you can't say enough for the value of that kind of investing in that upfront early design stage. And clearly there's a thing here around who is paying for the risk. So conventionally you have a 12-month latent defects period. Then it's over to again, the housing association, local authority to ultimately, or in the case of a new build home, the homeowner to ultimately bear the brunt of any longer term issues that might manifest. So again, what's the cost of testing measurement at the point of sign off to just check it works in the immediate term versus the cost of disputes and remediation and going to court and all the finger pointing that might go on otherwise. So yes, the contractor might charge more if you're putting the risk on them, but then evidence of performance at the end is a condition of payment, and it again is recognizing that you're getting that value over the long term. So okay, the job might have been more expensive up front, but you've got what you paid for. And so you've got this concept of hidden debt due to performance gaps. So yeah, who suffers in the long term if the project doesn't deliver what it was supposed to? Just take a crude example of a £10 million retrofit project targeting a 50% energy reduction in bills, but that only delivers 30%. So, yeah, that wouldn't be unusual, the 20% kind of shortcoming on the spec. But that's amounting to £200,000 a year in savings that haven't been realised, whether it's for the residents or the landlord. And over a 30-year life of an EWI program or whatever it may be, you're looking at 6 million. Sorry, so that really does add up. And if that's impacting the tenant's ability to pay rent or impacting the value of a build-to-rent scheme or impacting the desirability of a building, then yeah, that's not trivial kind of shortcoming on what was potentially quite a short-sighted decision at an early upfront procurement stage. And then I think just the measurement and data is helping you manage conflicts and disputes, and I think crucially future-proofing assets against EPC regulations. So the goal, if I know a lot of housing associations target EPCC, but actually if you're working to that and then emission factors change or we're about to shift to the home energy model, the goalposts completely move. So I think, again, set a performance outcome specification, know what you want in terms of running costs, comfort, fabric performance, and get your head down and deliver against that rather than trying to hit a moving target. And I know you could have a case study on a really complex, large, multifaceted project, but just thinking at an individual property level, here we've got a heat pump installer in Your Energy Your Way using smart HTC and U-value measurements at the earliest assessment stage. So challenging those worst case estimates that are otherwise in a heat loss calculation on a 1930s detached home. And so using measured heat loss rather than calculated led to the heat pump being 8 kilowatts rather than 12. And that's proven out by basically the U values were measured at 1.2 rather than the default of 1.7. And so just in those measurements alone, just at that upfront assessment stage, you've demonstrated very clearly in black and white that the existing fabric is okay, and decarbonisation and running cost savings will be best achieved with an appropriately sized heat pump. And in this case, there was also PV and the battery added. Because of that readjustment on the overall heat loss, it meant that 5 planned radiator changes weren't needed. So you've, just in doing those measurements, guided the design, the investment strategy, delivered some savings because you could have just done a bog standard assessment and just thrown in a bigger heat pump and a few radiator replacements, but you've not. And you've also delivered an improved operational efficiency over the 10-15 year life of that heat pump. So yeah, really quite powerful. If that's just an individual home, scale that up across a social housing fund project, or the differences can be immense just by spending that little bit more upfront on the assessment. I've gone wildly over time, so quick call to actions. However whoever you are kind of whichever angle you're coming at this from, I think if I was to pick just a few things to do immediately off the back of this, would be, if you're a building owner, manager, or landlord, check what your employer requirements and tenders say about outcomes. How outcome orientated is some of that documentation, and I think really seek to challenge your supply chain for evidence. Show me, don't just tell me what you're going to do. Don't just write it down that this is the best building since sliced bread. Actually show me with the data. If you're a professional advisor, I think register with some of the tender portals, look at some of the framework providers, engage with your local housing associations and local authorities. They do have an SME and localism agenda. Identify contractors appointed to deliver large contracts. Again, that might be on your patch. You might be able to, again, kind of serve that localism agenda. Particularly, Warm Homes Social Housing Fund, Warm Homes Local Grant. We know that the energy company obligation is no more, so that the way that the retrofit projects in particular are delivered now is going to be much more kind of community-based and delivered at a kind of a decentralized local government kind of level, rather than through energy companies, or rather than through central government as it traditionally has. And define your value proposition. So I can't be strong enough about this. There really needn't be a race to the bottom to just tick boxes. And they want an air tightness test, and it's just to tick a box, so I'm going to make it as cheap and cheerful as I can. You're actually delivering immense value, and if someone doesn't want to pay for a good detailed building assessment, or they don't want ventilation testing, then actually the problem's with them and not you. There is so much value in what you're offering in terms of that upfront detailed assessment or post-completion measurement and checking, because otherwise contractually that housing association, that installer is massively exposed. That evidence, that measurement from an independent advisor is really, really valuable. And then contracted installers, review how you currently demonstrate quality and performance. How clear is it in your tenders and your marketing that you actually show them what you've delivered, not just tell them. There's not just these kind of wordy case studies, pretty pictures. Actually, do these buildings perform? Okay, they've delivered an EPCC or B or whatever, but do they actually perform? What's the measured ventilation flow rates? Do they comply with Part F? What's the measured U values? What's the measured heat loss? That stuff really matters. Okay, so we've got a bit of time there for Q&A. That's me. Thank you for listening. Just a quick word before we jump into Q&A. Our next webinar will be Richard talking in a bit more detail actually about heat pump sizing, using measured heat loss to optimize heat pump design. That one will be on the 9th of April, so just about a month's time. And just some upcoming dates to mention as well. BTS is increasingly offering more and more training. So we've got a level 1 air tightness course, an upskill course for blower door testers to get into pulse testing. We now offer a U-value measurement course as well. So yeah, there's a QR code there, or otherwise check out the training page on our website. And then if we don't see you before, we're at Future Build early May on stand D72. Again, QR code there if you want to find out a bit more about that, or let us know if you're going. It'll be great to see you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We hope that the session has given you some food for thought, and we do hope that you will join us for the next one on the 9th of April, where we will be covering using measured heat loss to optimize heat pump design. We will see you there.